Trickle was on the low side coming turn 2, and around goes Earnhardt, up in the air and over. Both cars land on their wheels, but Trickle and Earnhardt Jr. go for a wild ride down the back straightaway of Daytona.
This is as low as it would ever get for Dale Earnhardt Jr. at Daytona in his very first race there as a NASCAR competitor. What proceeded in the next decade plus would be nothing short of phenomenal, as he laid down his own legacy at the World Center of Racing by becoming a fixture as the driver to beat year in, year out. How did he accomplish all this, you may ask? Well, he had a pretty good teacher. We all know Jr. is a 2-time Daytona 500 champion and won an additional 2 July races at the Cup level. But digging further past the surface, his success in the now Xfinity Series is even more explosive. That's what I'm going to focus on here, because it would be criminal for it to go unnoticed. Back in the days of bushwhacking, several key figures led the charge in crashing the party for the series regulars who were trying to make a name for themselves and carve their own careers by putting on a clinic and using their advanced wisdom and equipment to their advantage. Mark Martin terrorized the Busch Series in the 90s. Then along came Matt Kenseth, Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, and Denny Hamlin. But what doesn't get talked about enough is how often Dale Jr. would enter in the restrictor plate events at Daytona and Talladega and basically stink up the show. But I don't think Jr. did this out of cruelty. I truly think it was out of his own enjoyment of that style of racing, and it seasoned his craft to prepare him for the bigger Sunday events. It's something he took pride in and aided his ability to consistently run up front in a type of racing where most came and went. So let's get into the details of how he pulled off victory after victory at the historic facility on the East Florida coast while etching his name in NASCAR royalty in the process. Jr. would take a hiatus from the Busch Series for a couple of years after his Cup Series career got started. It needed to have his full attention in order to propel himself into the upper echelon of the superstars he dreamed of joining the likes of. But he would make a triumphant return in Speed Weeks 2002 and ripped off a 4-race win streak at Daytona that was every bit as ridiculous as you think it was. Just a year removed from the unthinkable tragedy of losing his father on the same weekend, he struck a 2-race deal with RCR and carried the sacred number 3 along with it. But this team had a trick up their sleeve. During practice, they made a hole in the radiator pan to create a vacuum and allow air to go through the grill and suck the nose down to the track to make the car turn and handle better. That's all the boost Jr. needed to get a head start on a track he already felt comfortable at. Dale had plenty of talent and intangibles that came with plate racing as it was, but being surrounded by some of the craftiest mechanics and engineers in the garage that specialized in this niche didn't hurt either. He had the best engine tuners, fabricators, you name it. The race was delayed over 2 hours for rain, but the skies eventually cleared and Jr. would roll off 4th on the starting grid. And just because this wasn't the Cup Series didn't mean it was any easier. There were roughly a dozen drivers either making their first ever start at Daytona or their first Busch Series start there. Make that a dozen wild cards and obstacles you'd want to avoid if you're Jr., because those guys were prone to making a big mistake. Also in races like this, it brought out the veterans and the most experienced drivers. Randy LaJoie won this race 3 times and started right alongside Dale. Front row Joe Nemechek was, well, on the front row. Michael Waltrip, defending Daytona 500 champ and Jr.'s Cup Series teammate, was in the field, but note they were no such thing in this race. Add in guys like Jeff Green, Jimmy Spencer, and Jeff Purvis, I could go on. Matt Kenseth, Dale's standout competitor and on-track rival from their full-time days in the series, was present as well, just to give you a perspective on how this race was far from a given. Now, Dale Jr. did not dominate the first half of this race. He first took the lead 11 laps in, but battled a tight condition despite staying within striking distance and hovered around the top 5. There were other cars that seemed better for a while, but as the laps clicked off, the top contenders took themselves out. Whether it was Nemechek blowing an engine in the early going, Jimmy Spencer having a flat tire late, Greg Biffle getting into a crash, it was all less that Jr. had to deal with. The team kept making air pressure adjustments, but it came down to getting the track position he needed. On a pit stop just before lap 80 after a multi-car pileup, the 3-team opted for just a gas and go, as in no tires. Most of the field behind them elected to go with them, leading you to believe that wasn't the best idea. But those other cars weren't this one. It was set up to handle better when leading, and those guys knew what they were doing. Turns out, Jr. would never give up the lead again. As the laps wound down, Casey Mears spun on the back straightaway but dropped no debris and got going out of harm's way. But just a few laps later, Jeff Purvis wrecked out of the lead draft and appeared to have a battered race car, and with 3 to go, it appeared the race was about to be ended prematurely. But to everyone's surprise, NASCAR never threw the caution and sat back and let the race finish. Purvis got out of harm's way as well, and in the process of spinning, he broke up the small pack at the front. It left just 3 cars to try to make a hopeless move on Dale Jr., but nothing materialized. Although he courteously gave Waltrip a lap back earlier in the race, Michael felt he owed Dale nothing and tried one last run, but to no avail. The tires held up from lap 57 on and gave another classic call from Alan Bestwick to bring Jr. to the checkered flag at Daytona, just like he did the previous July.
Driving a Richard Childress number 3, made famous by his father. Here comes Dale Earnhardt Jr. to the start-finish line. Checkered flag, he wins at Daytona.
Great job, all you guys, Bobby.
Going into this race, Dale had never led a single lap in a Busch race here. He left leading over half of this one and was only getting started. Fast forward to the next year and he was with his own startup team, Chance 2 Motorsports. The last year was just for fun, but this time around there was a little more at stake. Jr. had spent the entire Speed Weeks boat racing the competition and winning every event he was a part of. He won the Bud Shootout to start things off, sat on the front row in qualifying, won his dual race on Thursday, and with a win here would be a Daytona 500 victory shy of pulling off the unthinkable feat of sweeping the entire Speed Weeks of 2003. Obviously no one had ever accomplished this, but if Dale was able to do it, he would no doubt be instantly labeled one of the all-time greats at Daytona, and he was still in the very early years of his career. The field for this race was very similar to last year's, but add in the fast RCR entry of Kevin Harvick, the 2001 Series champ, and the task of winning got much steeper. Harvick would assume the pole after Jeff Green was asked to substitute for a sick Nemechek and had to relinquish the spot, and Kevin took advantage. He would proceed to lead the first 53 laps of the race with Jr. in tow as a single file line would break away from the rest of the pack and put on a brisk pace. Dale may have had a better car, but he was settled in behind the 21 with seemingly no intentions to make a move. Maybe he was just playing chicken, but no one would really find out for quite some time. It wasn't until a pit stop under caution almost at the halfway point where Jr. and his team finally chose to put on just 2 tires and got him the track position to beat out Harvick and everyone else to assume the lead. That would be the only lead change of the race. Just like the year before, once Jr. got out in front in these races, you weren't getting back around him. The car was set up too well to lead, and it was going to take a well-timed run with several cars to overtake him. He immediately showcased just how strong the 8 car was and took command. Harvick set himself back further later on in the race by leaving his stall with the catch can still attached under the next yellow, and a possible partner to work with, Michael Waltrip, was taken out in a crash as well. But that just didn't matter. Dale's car was simply too strong to be fazed by any variable that could have worked against him. Harvick would finally catch back up to him with less than 10 to go, but could never materialize a run with anyone to make a charge. Kenseth and others were in the picture, but there simply weren't enough strong contenders lined up to organize any plan to try to win. A multi-car accident broke out with just 2 to go to end the race a lap early, which wouldn't have made a difference anyway, as Dale cruised to the checkered flag yet again to claim his second Busch Series Daytona win in a row. He was well on his way to the Speed Week sweep and seemed totally unstoppable. Unfortunately, a battery problem would keep that from happening the next day in a rain-shortened 500, relegating him to a 36th place finish, but we can all appreciate the stranglehold he had on the rest of the competition that week, winning 3 of the 4 races he competed in. When they came back in July that year, Jr. would get redemption in a big way. He not only won, but led every single lap. Yes, every last one. I know you're thinking, how could someone pull that off at a place like Daytona? Well, let's go through it step by step. You have to have a really fast car that handles well out front. Duh. You have to start at or near the front so you can lead the first lap. Jr. started on the pole. With the race only being 100 laps, these cars needed just 1 stop to make it on fuel the rest of the way. So he needed that timely caution where everyone would have to pit at the same time. If the stops came under green, drivers would stay out and lead a lap. He got that caution just before halfway. Oh, and he won the race off of pit road, of course. There was some slight concern that he slid the tires coming into his stall, but once he got back going under green, it was apparent that wasn't an issue. Plus, with how the track and the aero package these cars had were set up back then, handling was more of a factor than the draft. You needed both, but having a car that could stay in the throttle was just as important. Now granted, this field didn't have as many Cup Series regulars involved and the overall talent wasn't the greatest, but he still had his Cup teammate in Michael Waltrip right on his bumper and really acted as Dale's teammate in this race. He had no real obligation to work with Dale like this, but he chose to. Also, his car was just as strong, he couldn't help it. One of the few drivers that made any sort of lunge at trying to get the lead was Ron Hornaday, but after passing Waltrip on a late restart, Michael just passed him right back on the outside by himself, basically letting everyone know right then and there no one else had a chance. It was down to the 8 and 99, much like it was always down to the 8 and 15 in the Cup Series. There were some negotiating and mind games being played on pit road before one last restart with 9 to go on how Michael or anyone was going to form a train and dethrone Jr. Hornaday, Jamie McMurray, and Hornaday's teammate Johnny Sauter were all in the top 5, but it was all hopeless. Once they got back under green, just like the pack had been all night, they all just followed Dale, because that's all they could do. Anytime it appeared Waltrip was making a run, Jr. would just weave back and forth and break the draft, stopping Michael's momentum. None of the cars could even lay back enough and get on each other's bumper to make a run, and it was a cakewalk for Dale as he came to the checkered once again completely unscathed, turning in NASCAR's version of a perfect game and leading all 100 laps to win his third Busch Series race at Daytona in a row. Maybe it was a product of the package. You couldn't get big runs in these cars, and there was a strong wall of air behind the leader. Whoever was out front likely would have held serve. But ask yourself this, how many could have done it all 100 laps? I'm thinking there's only one. When the calendar turned and winter was thawing out in 2004, Dale Jr. would complete the 4-race win streak at Daytona in February. But this would be in an unorthodox fashion. The race would start as scheduled on Saturday afternoon, but with a rather ominous weather forecast, the start time got moved up to give the field a better chance to get to the halfway point before rain hit. And then there was another variable. It was evident that NASCAR and the fans had enough of the previous aero package the Busch Series was running at the plate tracks. When a driver leads every lap in a race that's supposed to level the playing field a little more, and there's a combined 2 lead changes in both 2003 races, there's a glaring problem. So NASCAR reverted back to roughly the same package the Cup cars used in 2001, with an air deflector on the roof and wicker bill on the spoilers to give the cars a high closing rate, which would allow more action, more passing, and more tight quarters pack racing. This would mean it would be tougher for someone like Jr. to get to the front and easily take control of the race with little challenges from behind. Or so they thought. Another factor to bring to the table, Jr. had a new running mate out there other than Michael Waltrip, his hand-picked prodigy embarking on the next level in his career, Martin Truex Jr. He started on the pole and would quickly adapt to the restrictor plate racing discipline with the best active mentor there was. When the race got started, it didn't take long for the fans to get their wish for more excitement with the big one taking place on lap 13. Jr. had just taken the lead, and on the ensuing pit stop elected for a gas and go, deciding to save the set of tires they had for later. Rain would soon start to fall under the same caution and bring the field to a halt on pit road. During the delay, Jr. would give some good insight on why he ran these races when he didn't even have to.
You love racing on the restrictor plate tracks in the Busch car, don't you?
Well, just a lot of fun. I mean, it's not your typical kind of racing, and I like it because it's more of a mind game, you know, than just who's got the best car or the best driver that day, you know, because you come to Daytona, it's pretty much anybody's game, and I like that factor. I like the drafting. I mean, there's not many tracks where you just catch a run on somebody and just blow by them and keep on going. It's just amazing to feel the draft that these cars create. Little Shane was telling me the next thing I need to do is drive a truck. He said I really wouldn't believe that shit, so...
That last part didn't have anything to do with the race. It was just hilarious. Unfortunately, the race would be unable to resume that day, but while it would have to wait until Monday to pick up where it left off, Jr. would win his first Daytona 500 the next day and experience the greatest moment in his racing career. But unlike a normal aftermath following a win on Sunday, he had to refocus and come back the next day with unfinished business left to attend to. Not just him, but his Cup Series crew pulled double duty as well. If you know anything about Dale Jr. and his team back in the day, it goes without saying they weren't in the best physical condition, if you know what I'm saying. Before they went back to green, the leaders all came down pit road, and this time Jr.'s team would take on 4 tires, but several cars flip-flopped and just took fuel. This put Jr. mid-pack, and it was almost costly. He narrowly avoided the second big one, but his new teammate Martin Truex couldn't say the same thing. On the preceding green flag runs, Jr. strangely couldn't find his way back to the front. No one would work with him, because they knew they couldn't let him get to the lead and take over again. They finally had him right where they wanted him. He tried a few charges to make a move, but decided it was getting too racy and rode in line. After a caution with less than 50 to go, Jr.'s delirious pit crew flexed their muscles and launched him into the top 5. He remained stuck in traffic for a few laps, unable to break through, but at last, with less than 40 to go, he pulled down underneath Harvick and made what would be the winning move, the same place on the track he pulled off the pass on Tony Stewart to win the 500 the day before. There were a few runs that pushed him to the limit from Johnny Sauter, David Stremme, and Harvick, but it was a familiar scene in the closing laps, everyone following the 8 car and nothing they could do about it. Jr. became the 3rd driver to sweep the Busch and Cup Series races in February at Daytona and claimed his 4th in a row.
Final chance, and it's not going to be enough. After a big day and a win in the Daytona 500 yesterday, Dale Earnhardt Jr. wins the Hershey's Kisses 300.
Whatever the circumstances, nothing fazed him. New rules package, having to wait till Monday to finish, possibly hungover, the man just kept winning. He was truly at the top of his game and didn't show signs of slowing down. When the series came back in the summer, Jr. was in position to make it 5 in a row, but fell victim to the late Jason Leffler driving over his head on the last lap and took both of them out, handing the win to Mike Wallace out of nowhere. The incident definitely ruffled his feathers, but to say it was going to be the beginning of his downfall would be over-exaggerating. He fell short in February 2006, but that July, he would put on a show that no eyes had ever seen in the restrictor plate era. Let me preface by saying this field was as stacked as any Busch Series race that Dale had ever entered here. Tony Stewart, Carl Edwards, Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, Casey Kane, Jamie McMurray, Greg Biffle, rookie phenom Denny Hamlin, just for starters. This wasn't a case of him out on a walk in the park and padding stats against a bunch of scrubs. Through the first 20 or so laps, nothing out of the ordinary was going on. But if you notice, as Jr. made his way toward the lead, he found a line right by the wall where no one else was really running. That would turn out to be the difference maker in this race. By lap 22, a stunning visual began to unfold. He started pulling away from the pack, by himself, like it was a standard cookie-cutter mile-and-a-half race. And not only was he out there on his own, he would add to his lead. This was turning into a laugher. Now I know, how in the hell is he doing this? How can that car have passed inspection and been allowed to race? It's a little complicated. This version of the pavement on the Daytona surface was in the final form of its lifespan. It was beaten up, worn down, cracked, lots of bumps, basically like Atlanta. Handling was becoming more and more of a factor, and it got to a point where it mattered more than being able to draft well. NASCAR also brought a harder tire compound for this race that affected the way the cars handled significantly. Add that into the way Jr.'s car was set up, and he rode that line he found and was able to mat the throttle all the way down and never had to lift, wherein other cars did as the run got longer and handling went away. He officially achieved video game level domination and ran off and hid from everyone else. Only someone with his wisdom of Daytona could pull this off, which is a club of a handful of people, none of them still alive or racing. The high line right by the wall was something Richard Petty perfected at this place, which created a cushion of air between the car and the wall, but it didn't make it stable. Jr. was clearly fighting how loose the car was and trying to keep it off the wall, but being able to stay wide open at all times was the difference. The rest of the field started getting strung out eventually, and Carl Edwards was really the only other car that showed he could break away and run on his own, but he was still 3 seconds behind Dale. That's how much separation there was. This race basically got turned into Darlington. After a cycle of green flag pit stops at the halfway portion of the race, Jr.'s lead doubled to a staggering 10 seconds. It was so substantial, he didn't even know where he was on the track.
I'm not leading him. Yes. By 10 seconds, over a second. Oh, I thought that was the leaders in front of me. Negative. Ghost Rider. Well, sorry, Pops, I didn't take back what I said.
It took one of those typical NASCAR phantom debris cautions to try to drum up some excitement, but naturally it just sparked a pair of multi-car accidents, with one resulting in a red flag to repair a crossover gate on the front straightaway. Cars tried to take advantage of it by pitting to try to adjust and have any faint hope at hanging with the 8 car, but I think we know how that ends. The entire complexion of this race changed with all the yellows that followed, and it started looking more like a traditional restrictor plate event. Jr. wasn't able to pull away like he did previously, but he still more than had enough to hold off the pack behind him. Brian Vickers gave a valiant effort, and Harvick rallied from starting 42nd to be in position, but Jr. was simply too strong. A victory this punishing deserved a king-size celebration, which Dale delivered. His burnout was so powerful it broke the transmission and stuck in gear. The team turned the tri-oval into victory lane and got the crowd going, but they were the only ones really happy that night. Safe to say that tire compound was never brought back, and the rest of the disgruntled garage wouldn't miss it.
There's a lot of different emotions, that it brings up when when people say, here the 3's coming back. When you're growing up and you're young and you're little and going to the racetrack with your dad, you always want to drive his car and wonder what it's like and all those things. And it's an honor for me to do it. It's not mine to take and use whenever I feel like using it. You just don't grab the car keys off the counter and go run out the door and haul down the road with your dad's car. I just wanted to go to the racetrack and run it once before I retire, And this will probably be it. I mean, after this, I'll probably never drive a car with a 3 on it again. So I can pretty much say I'm 99% sure that'll never happen again.
In July of 2010, it would all come back full circle as once again Jr. teamed up with RCR to make one last ride with a 3 car a reality at the NASCAR level. It was 2002 all over again where this all started, but this wasn't just the number. The team went all out and replicated the iconic Wrangler colors to give the most genuine tribute possible. This meant a lot to not just Junior or Richard Childress, but the Earnhardt family and the fans who were loyal for both generations and endured a life with that number and car absent for almost a decade. Dale felt the pressure of wanting to win and knew anything less than a win would be a disappointment.
If the 3 is coming back, they don't want it to run second, you know what I mean? So I feel that pressure.
Junior would start third and made an early push for the lead, but ended up getting shuffled and ran mid-pack for much of the first half, which was uncharted territory for him in this series. But there was no panic from the pit crew and crew chief Tony Eury Jr., and Dale didn't even want any adjustments to the car. They knew what their driver was capable of and saw it time and time again. But this race ended up kind of similar to the one in 2006, but for a different reason. The now nationwide series debuted a new car on this weekend, and it handled extremely aero loose. As the longest green run of the race wore on, the better handling cars that could hold the throttle down longer were able to rise to the top while everyone else faded. It was Dale Jr. and Kyle Busch who broke away from the pack, and they would set the tone past halfway. Jr. rode behind Busch for several laps, but made the pass on the outside in the tri-oval with around 30 to go. And you know how this goes. He never gave the lead back up. The field broke up and was narrowed down to a 4-car breakaway in the closing laps, with Kevin Harvick right on Jr.'s heels. But a caution with 4 to go would mean the race came down to a green-white checkered finish. Some drivers chose to pit, thinking tires would make a difference, but Dale stuck to what he did best and stayed out and figured track position was the way to go. Just like in 2002 and all those years in between, he held on with older tires and no one had anything for him. It was once again Alan Bestwick on the call, and another all-time classic moment at Daytona unfolded.
Here they come to the checkered flag.
You got it, man.
And Earnhardt is going to drive a number 3 car to victory lane at Daytona again. Dale Earnhardt Jr. wins.
It's easy to diminish this stretch of domination given that it wasn't the Cup Series, but when you take into account that several highly talented Cup Series drivers entered these races in just as good of equipment, and all the fluctuating variables as the years went by over time, the one constant was that Dale Jr. had a natural ability to excel at Daytona. It was in his genes, always a destiny for him. From leading every lap, to pulling away from the entire pack into his own zip code, to having all the pressure on him to deliver in the 3-car, he conquered it all. He was the Pied Piper. Everyone followed him. When he took the lead, you knew it was over. He didn't make a mistake. No one could figure out a way to defeat him. He was just better. The Earnhardt name and Daytona just go hand in hand. It was a match meant to be. Just take some time to appreciate how phenomenal Jr. was at this discipline. Where so many resented it or struggled mightily, this was his specialty, his comfort zone. 6 wins, 10 top 5s, 14 top 10s, 560 laps led. That's dominance. That's what he did here his entire career. He was the standard. His team knew how to build the right race cars for this track. They showed how it's done and how to celebrate. Well, that's it for this time, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and be sure to like and subscribe like your life depends on it. This has been a Platinum Paradise video.